Welcome to our weekday. Not everybody's muted. Can you mute yourself if you're hearing a big echo? Echo. Okay. Sorry, guys. Let's try this again. Welcome to our weekday text gathering. This is day 140 in the Circle's reading calendar, and we are studying the last section of chapter 10. This is section 5, the denial of God. I have to say this is one of my favorite sections because it cuts right to the heart of why so many of us choose the course as our path. I will... Sorry, hold on, guys.
I think that might be John.
Okay, John. Are we good now? Okay. What was I saying? This section cuts to the heart. We are not doing so good this morning. Why is this?
I think people are getting unmuted
But I've muted everyone and it's not quite working. If you can, everyone make sure that you are muted, because I can't see on this end who is not muted.
Oh yeah.
It looks like from what I see on the screen, it's all everyone is muted, even though.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay. Sorry about this, guys. I do sincerely apologize. As I was saying, we are in section 10, chapter 10, section 5, the denial of God. This is an extraordinary section, and as we'll discuss, it has some very powerful things to say about the way in which we find God through our brothers. So as for announcements for today, I hope that today is Tuesday, so I hope all of you received your Circle news yesterday. We released a new podcast on healing childhood wounds. We also started a new video series. Robert and I are doing short videos. We are calling them Exploring a Course in Miracles Shorts, and we are taking you inside Course Scribe Helen Schuckman's original notebooks and walking you through material that has been restored in the CE. In the first episode that was released yesterday, we discussed the first line of A Course in Miracles, which is not, there is no order of difficulty in miracles. It is actually, you will see miracles through your hands, through me. And so it's their short videos. Yesterday's was about 7 minutes, but truly fascinating peek into Helen's notebooks.
Sarah says she enjoyed the first one.
Oh, great. Thank you, Sarah. So because this section is about our brothers and seeing the truth in them in part, I wanted to read one of my favorite prayers today. You guys are probably all familiar with this one by now. This is the prayer for relationships and healing from Marianne Williamson's book, Illuminata. And I love this one, so I want to share it with you again. If you would, close your eyes. Take a deep breath with me. Bow your head in prayer and listen to these beautiful words from Miss Marianne Williamson. Dear God, show me the light at the center of my brothers. Show me the light at the center of myself. Show me the light at the center of the world. Where I see guilt, show me innocence. Where I focus on mistakes, show me how to focus on efforts at good. Help me have faith in the goodness of others. Help me have faith in your spirit within me. Thus may darkness be cast out. May I cleave to the light that is in my heart. This is my prayer. May I see the light in everyone. Amen. Over to you,
I guess it's my turn.
Robert.
Okay. Oh, I can't share my screen. We will get the hang of that in like September, probably. Okay. Okay, let me bump up the magnification here. Okay, as Emily said, our section is the denial of God. It's the last section of chapter 10, and it's all about our primary problem or sickness, you could say, being the denial of God, and then the solution being the acknowledgement of God. But how that denial is framed and how the acknowledgement is framed, I think, is very unexpected. My first point here says we denied God because we couldn't accept being the created. This section contains one of the course's really important statements of how the separation got started in the first place. And the course says a couple of different things about how it got started, but this is one of those things, one of the main things. This will be expanded on in chapter 11, next chapter. Okay, sickness and death entered the mind of God's Son against his, God's will. God didn't want sickness and death entering our minds. The quote, attack on God, and that's a reference to the separation, made his Son think he, the Son, was fatherless. And out of his depression, he made the God of depression, which I see, the God of depression, I see as the principal depression elevated to godlike status. This was his alternative to joy, because he would not accept the fact that although he was a creator, he had been created. Now, this is a way of talking about the authority problem, right? We don't like the idea there is this authority over us, this creator who created us. We become this kind of secondary, subservient, dependent effect of some prior cause. And something in us just grates at that. And that, according to this passage, was the beginning of the separation. So we need to ask ourselves, can we find that within ourselves now? Does something in us not like the idea of being the created? What I realized a lot of years ago, well, about 5 years ago or so, I have thought of God in very positive terms personally for a long time. But I realized several years ago that I didn't really think of God as having created me. And yet, that's one of the most frequent things the Course talks. It talks about God as our creator all over the place. Not on every page, but it's probably pretty close. So after all that talk, for all those years of God as my creator, it never really occurred to me that God was my creator. So why was I avoiding that? What was my problem with that? Okay, number 2, the denial of God is our religion. This chapter has a lot of religious imagery, all of which frames our religion as not being, Christianity or something like that, a formal religion, but being the ego's religion. Every ego has things that it worships as the ultimate principle, and to which we are supposed to be subject and subservient and obedient. So whatever your surface religion is, this is saying that the denial of God is kind of our operative religion. And we'll see what that means a bit more as we go on. This, which refers to being sick, is the offering which your God demands, because having made him out of your insanity, he is an insane idea, your God, lowercase g. He has many forms, but though he may seem like many different things, he is but one idea, the denial of God. How can it be that the denial of God is the religion we're all practicing all through every day? It just seems a bit harsh, doesn't it? Like, if we're here, we believe in God, we may like God, love God. So how is it that we're constantly denying God? What does that mean? Okay, we'll see as we go on. Number 3, denial of God is not guilty pleasures and affirmation of self. That's kind of how we think about denying God in our culture. It's like, well, you deny God to have fun, right? You deny God to affirm yourself. But that's not what denial of God amounts to. It is depression and denial of our very identity. So denial of God is the opposite of how it's not like fun and pumping ourselves up. It's denying our identity, denying our very life so that we experience death, and it's depression. He says, the rituals of the god of sickness are strange and very demanding. Joy is never permitted, for depression is the sign of allegiance to him. So if our God is a god of sickness, how do we show loyalty to him? Well, we're depressed. Depression means that you have forsworn God. So if God is a God of joy, then if we've forsworn him, that means we're depressed. Another passage says, it is the denial of the spark, that divine spark we talked about yesterday, and here it means in your brothers, that brings depression. For whenever you see your brothers without it, you are denying God. So now, denial of God brings depression, but the form that denial of God takes is denying the spark in our brothers. So if you see someone as like devoid of all spark of divinity, which is how we typically see each other, do you think, oh, I'm denying God by seeing that person as just a normal, self-serving human? This section that is denial of God. And because denying God leads to depression, that does lead to depression. Number 4, the real meaning of blasphemy is the denial of the identity God gave us and others. Now, blasphemy, of course, is some kind of insult or offense toward God, right? Some way of, insulting him. But now, blasphemy is framed slightly differently, but without losing that original meaning. This is a beautiful passage. If God knows his children as wholly sinless, it is blasphemous to perceive them as guilty. Quite a line, right? I mean, how often do we see others as guilty? The Course says we do so all the time, to one degree or another. That's blasphemy. If God knows his children as wholly without pain, it is blasphemous to perceive suffering anywhere. Now, obviously, we know people are suffering, and we do perceive that, but ideally, we don't see that suffering as reaching all the way into their real being, their real identity. We see it as a surface thing. If God knows his children to be wholly joyous, it is blasphemous to feel depressed. Now, is that because we're God? No, it's because God created us a certain way. So, as with any artist, the most effective way to insult an artist is to insult his artwork, right? Insult his creation. A creator is identified with his creation. So if God created us sinless, without pain, and joyous, then to perceive ourselves or anyone else as other than that is blasphemy. It is a kind of insult to the Creator. So now we see that denial of God is taking a very down-to-earth form. Let me just finish this passage out. All these illusions and the many other forms which blasphemy may take are refusals to accept creation as it is. And creation here in the Course does not mean physical creation. It doesn't mean the physical world, nature. It refers to our true identity. So if you see yourself as sinful or depressed or in pain, you are not accepting how God created you, and you are engaging in blasphemy. Okay, number 5, the way back is to acknowledge God. So if the whole problem was we denied God, the way back is to acknowledge him. One of the sentences in the section says, when you acknowledge him, you will know that he has never ceased to acknowledge you, and that in his acknowledgement of you lies your being. Which suggests that not only God has never ceased to acknowledge you, but your very being lies in his acknowledgement of you. It's like, how do you know he's acknowledging you? You exist. If he stopped, you wouldn't. But the real Father must be acknowledged if the real Son is to be recognized. So the way back is to acknowledge God. What does that mean? And to me, point number 6 is like the key to the section. It means that to acknowledge him as creator. And that means to acknowledge his creations as he created them. It basically means we're saying to God, I acknowledge that you have the creative power in reality, so that whatever you created something as, that's what it is. And that's the very thing we're not doing all through every day, right? We're not seeing ourselves as God created us. We're not seeing other people as God created them. We look at them, we see physical bodies. The Course says he didn't create bodies. The Course is really clear about that. We look at them and we basically see bodies animated by egos, but he didn't create egos either. He created these shining, limitless, purely spiritual, divine sons. And that's what everyone is in disguise. And unless we see other people as that, unless we see ourselves as that, we are practicing the ego's religion of denying God. What a wild idea. I mean, I just think that, we're so used to traditional religion where it's all about, we praise God, we worship God, we understand how mighty God is, and we think it's wonderful how amazing he is, and we sing praises to him for that reason. I remember I've driven behind trucks at points, like out in the desert, and you see this bumper sticker on the back of certain trucks that says, his name is not the man upstairs. His name is, I think it was Jesus, because Jesus is God in that Christianity, that form of Christianity. It's like God is so great and we're magnifying him so much that we need to make sure not only do we get his name right, but you all get his name right too. That's what we're used to. But this is saying, how do you acknowledge him? You concede that he has the creative power such that how he created everyone is how they are. And here's this passage. If you will accept yourself as God created you, you will be incapable of suffering. Wow, incapable of suffering. Not like you'll suffer less or you'll bring your suffering down to zero. It's you'll bring it down to zero, and no matter what happens, you'll be incapable of raising it from there. But to do this, you must acknowledge him as your creator. And there is that acknowledgement of him as creator. This is not because you'll be punished otherwise. It is merely because your acknowledgement of your Father is the acknowledgement of yourself as you are. Your Father created you holy, without sin, holy, without pain, and wholly without suffering of any kind. If you deny him, you bring sin, pain, and suffering into your own mind because of the power he gave it. I just think, and I know I just keep saying this, but it's a very beautiful way to think about the acknowledgement of God, right? Unless you're seeing everyone as purely divine, without any sin, without any pain or suffering, you're not acknowledging God as creator. Okay. So there were we discussed this morning, Emily and I. There were a lot of points that we talked about, and there's no time for them, but I guess we probably should talk about one or two of them.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning was that this section is one of my all-time favorites for the very reasons that you've just outlined throughout, but especially in point 6. And the Course says that God created us, and thank God that he did, otherwise we would destroy ourselves. But the way that we find our joy is not to deny him, but to recognize him. And the way we recognize him is recognizing the holiness within ourselves and the holiness within everyone else without exception. It is the ultimate message of equality, and that is unquestionably why the Course is my path. I'll speak for myself, but as I look out at the landscape of faith, you see so much of conventional religion that is worship God, but judge your brother. And there's so much of conventional spirituality that is you are God and you overlook your brother in pursuit of that divine connection. And the Course is just this brilliant and beautiful middle way that says you didn't create yourself and you find yourself through your brother. And it's remarkable, extraordinary, and just flat out genius. And it can't, the Course's voice is so needed in the world.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
So, okay, we do have some questions, and I know you have an exercise, but one question that comes up in relation to this section that I have heard, and I think it's very important, is depression is a huge topic all around the world, and we are not told when we are depressed that our depression is caused from our denial of God and denying the spark of light in our brother. We are told that our depression is caused by chemical imbalance, and we are given psychotherapeutic drugs to correct that imbalance, and oftentimes those drugs do seem to help. And so how do we square that with the teachings in this section on depression?
Well, that's, the whole issue of the brain is an issue that it's a, it's kind of, it comes up a lot if you think through the teachings of the Course. I think what the Course would say is, first of all, the brain's part of the body. The brain's not the mind. Jesus was really adamant. He didn't want Helen and Bill to even be involved in. There was some program, some university thing that he didn't want them to be involved in because it equated the mind with the brain. At the same time, our mind is mediated through the brain. One of the models that I personally like is the idea the brain doesn't produce consciousness, it's a filter for consciousness. So mind is much bigger, and then it passes through this filter and it comes out the other side just a trickle of what it normally is. But as it passes through that filter, the filter is such that things in the filter affect what comes out the other side. I think what the Course would say is your brain wouldn't have those imbalances if you really were using your mind properly. The mind would right the brain. And I think the Course would would say that's the way to really solve the issue. But along the way, it admits that we're often going to need the magic of medicine. And, a painkiller is ultimately no different than, meds for depression. So I don't think we should see a stigma around that. I don't think we should think, well, I need to be able to overcome this just with thought alone, so I'm not going to take my meds. At the same time, we probably should realize this is kind of a stopgap for the ultimate real solution. And I do think that, psychotherapy has gone down, it's gone down this medication path so heavily in recent decades. And I think we're going to be waking up, and, a lot of people already are, to the fact that that's not the way to go. Yeah, they can help, but ultimately changing your thinking is the cure.
So we do have some questions in the chat that I'll ask on the other end of the exercise, but another question that comes up in this section a lot is paragraph 4, sentence 1 says, sickness and death entered the mind of God's Son against his will, his, capital H, being God. And you often hear, how could anything happen against his will? So would you like to address that before you go into the exercise?
Yeah, the course has two sides, and both are really, really important. One side is, I think this very section says, God would not know his Son if he did not know him as free. God created us with free will, and that's how he knows us. So God's not going to step in and curtail that. That would be to go against how he created us. On the other hand, when we use our free will to do things that are contrary to God, God, for our protection, A, allows them to happen, but B, makes sure they aren't truly real. So it's like if you like the perfect parent might say, well, if you want to play with matches, that's fine. But while you do it, I'll make sure that you're in some kind of simulation where the matches don't cause real fire and don't burn down the real house. And and that's a way you can have freedom, but also have it safely.
Mm-hmm. It's a tricky needle to thread because it says sickness and death entered the mind of God's Son against his will. So something happened against his will, and yet it didn't ultimately happen. So both things are true at once.
And it's important that he say against his will, because does God want sickness and death to enter our minds? Yeah, so it's true that there's this thing where he lets us have our freedom, and he also puts us in a padded cell while we misuse it.
Okay, do the exercise.
Oh, yeah, okay. Right. We don't have any more questions right now?
We do, but for those who have to
Okay.
drop off because we're
Okay.
at time to do the exercise and ask the questions on the other side of it.
Okay. Okay. It's a very brief exercise. Go ahead and close your eyes. And let's just say the following to God, knowing that this is, in a sense, the core issue of our existence. This issue is what brought a universe of time and space into being. It's what causes our suffering, our anxiety, our depression, day in and day out. So we're getting to the very heart of the matter here. So go ahead and say the following to God. My denial of you brought depression and sickness and death into my experience. I choose to acknowledge you instead. I acknowledge you as my creator. If you created me sinless, it is blasphemous to perceive myself as guilty. If you created me wholly joyous, it is blasphemous to feel depressed. I accept myself exactly as you created me. And thus I acknowledge you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Robert. So we have some questions here. Samantha says, if heaven is love and pure love, and that is where we started, why would we think negatively and want to think ourselves into authority in our minds? How could the separation of
Right. This is asked a lot. I think we just thought, hey, I wonder if we could, if it could even get better by being on top of the heap. I think we just had an experimental thought. And this whole experience is just experiencing the actual consequences of like what that thought naturally brings with it. And in heaven, the Course says it took an instant and then it was done. So we're just inside a pretty big instant, experiencing the natural consequences of that thought.
Anita says, is it blasphemous to perceive suffering in my brother?
I think, what the Course wants a kind of a dual picture, just like we talked about a minute ago, where God lets it happen and doesn't let it be real. Lesson 191 in the workbook says, look about the world and see the suffering there. Is not your heart willing to bring your weary brothers rest? So he's saying, see the suffering. But this lesson is saying it's blasphemous to perceive suffering. I think what that's saying is there's a workbook lesson that says, whatever suffers is not part of me. So we need to acknowledge our brothers are experiencing suffering. That's why God created the Holy Spirit. Okay, so God knows about that too. And we need to acknowledge that it's kind of like waves on the surface that don't go down to the depths. The depths are still. That person's depths are free of the churning of suffering. So the suffering is not real. It's just a superficial kind of phenomenon. So we need to see both things. If I think a lot of people take the Course to be saying, if you think you see suffering, just correct your own perception and walk on by. And that goes against the whole idea. This is a Course in expressions of love, and we're here to be healers. So we have to hold those two sides in tension and not just go over to one side or the other.
Yeah, speaking of two sides and tension, this isn't a question from Carla, but it makes for an interesting question. It says, the Bible clearly says, judge not, and you shall not be judged. And this is often forgotten in our zeal to point out sins. What do you make of that, Robert, where the Bible does say, judge not, and yet there is so much judgment that occurs in the name of the Bible and traditional Christianity?
Yeah, well, first of all, judge not is one of the most quoted and referenced Bible verses in the Course. He says, judge not, judge over and over and over again. I think that was part of Jesus's original teachings. His original teachings were about unconditional love, that God loved us unconditionally, and that we then could be like God and love others the same way and do miracles in the world thereby. And I just think that we were not in a position to handle that message at the time. And so all the normal stuff crept back in by the time the Gospels were written. You can still find those pure teachings in there, but they're right next to all the other stuff because it's human nature. And human nature tends to be what creates our religions.
And you believe that the Course is his attempt to try again?
Yeah, I do. I really do. I mean, I think that there's an amazing correspondence between some of what's been recovered of his original teachings and the Course. It's just astonishing, I think.
A couple more questions. I know you have a workbook class to get to, but
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Lorraine says, is there really mental illness? Is it a spiritual issue rather than a physical one?
Well, the Course says that all illnesses of the mind, even physical illness, ultimately is the projection of mental illness onto the screen of the body, so to speak. So from the Course's standpoint, all illness is mental illness. And it is ultimately a spiritual illness, but a spiritual illness that comes down to how the mind has chosen to see things and think about things.
Last question is from Chris. He says, could you say that we are living in a simulation?
Well, yeah, but it's our own simulation. I really don't think this is a big computer simulation on some alien mainframe. I've seen the arguments for that, and I think they sneak in a lot of really questionable assumptions philosophically that are ultimately materialist assumptions about mind being a product of matter, which I think is a faith assumption that flies in the face of the evidence. So I don't think this is a big alien computer simulation, but you could say, I mean, when the Course says it's a dream, I mean, dreams are mental simulations, aren't they?
Margaret says she didn't receive the invite to the workbook class today. That did go out this morning from Danielle. I believe you do use the same links every time, and the password. We have updated everything with passwords as a result of our Zoom bomb last week, and you can find the passwords in the Course Companions membership site under the Start Here link.
I did get Danielle the class topics kind of late in the game, so it may not have gone out until somewhat recently.
I got it before this class started. So, okay, everybody, we will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow's Q&A, right? Tomorrow's Q&A.
Tomorrow's Q&A,
and then we'll start chapter 11. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Thank you so much.
Bye.